This is, JMac Watch. Pastor Michael, if I was reading a script and reading a teleprompter doing breaking news, I would think something was wrong because if my understanding is correct, we are doing JMac Watch, John MacArthur Watch. Are you ready to do this quick update today?
Yeah, we've done a lot of JMac Watch without doing JMac Watch, right? We're just starting to do a whole line of watches now, as is our custom, to turn everything into a new kind of tradition.
That's right.
Now it'll be the watches.
If you would like to buy Pastor Michael and I a watch that we can specifically wear when we do this segment, a watch, we would love that. That would be trendy. But Pastor Michael, yes, we are here. And in fact, we are too late to the game. This clip that broke over the weekend, and everyone you've ever met has already, people started podcasts.
Was it just this past weekend?
I think so. Let me look at the original tweet.
It feels like it was forever ago.
April 30th.
Yeah, the internet is a weird place.
About a week old. But all of your favorite people and least favorite people have all started podcasts to react to this clip, which may tell you something about even just the subject we're talking about, because everyone has had the need to come out and discuss this clip. Pastor Michael, we are, of course, referring to a Q&A that happened at Grace Church in California. I just call California one place. It could be in a different city, but it's all California to me. And it is a clip that was tweeted that has now been viewed 4.2 million times. And the scare quote at the top, that when I saw it a week ago, I said, I'm not watching this. I know we're going to end up reacting to this. Says, there's no such thing as PTSD. There's no such thing as OCD. There's no such thing as ADHD. John MacArthur. And so, as we haven't turned the audio on the clip yet, but you can see John MacArthur with a handheld mic sitting next to, I believe that is Costi Hinn.
Yeah, I think it is Costi Hinn.
Who
is looking at him in like kind of way, and we'll see what actually happens. Maybe that's just how Costi looks. I don't know.
It could be. He could be knowing this is going to get clipped and viewed 4.2 million times.
It's running through his head. He's like, I know where this is going.
Dude, there somewhere is going to be some jokester playing breaking news music and about to talk about this clip. So Pastor Michael, let's even just, isn't it interesting, again, that of the many things John MacArthur has talked about, now John MacArthur being very well known, very respected, but always definitely a man leaning into controversy, right? He's never leaned away. Has been talked about, right? Controversial takes or whatever for a long time. I just find it very interesting that this clip in particular was one that everyone, including us, has felt the need to offer a response to. Phil Johnson, one of the classic JMac men, spent about the last week defending this clip from a variety of angles and reasons. And so I just think it's very interesting. Pastor Michael, what do you think it says that, Lutheran pastors, right? Pastors from across the spectrum, non-Christians, everyone was talking about, in general, in my very small algorithmically created X Twitter world, was talking about this. What do you think that says?
Yeah, number one actually points out what you just pointed out, that the algorithm determines what we think about. Mm-hmm. So that in itself is interesting, right? Because it doesn't matter what kind of subculture you're a part of. If this goes viral, then you you're going to be a part of it. You're going to be interested in it. You're going to be thinking about it. You're going to be asked about it. Somebody's going to talk about it, and some podcast is going to react to it, you know?
Yep.
And so that in itself is maybe, something bad to be said about us who are now doing that. But also, I do think that it has to do with the topic, right? John MacArthur says a lot of things that are controversial, and sometimes they go viral.
Yep.
I do think that probably when it comes to issues of mental health, psychological ideas, all of a sudden that takes on a whole nother level where people are very invested in a particular view of these things. And so that's going to make it harder for most people, and especially people that have very strong opinions about, and got everybody listen, I've not seen this clip. It could be horrible, right? So I'm not, this is not me saying anything about the clip or about what John MacArthur says. But the fact is that people who are really invested in, a psychological understanding of the world and scripture and man are people that are hyper reactive to any kind of criticism of that. And even if that criticism is wrong, or whenever anybody says anything that's pretty off base to them, they're the kind of people that make a big deal about it, and maybe sometimes that's okay. Again, haven't seen the clip. I'm just telling you that the fact is that we live in a hyper psychologized culture, a culture that sees, psychological factors as being the center of how we interpret ourselves in the world.
Yeah. I agree. I think that what it shows is, we live in a time, and I'm going to use the word obsessed, but I don't even mean it necessarily negatively, but I will explain why it probably is negative. We live in a time that is fairly obsessed with mental health. And now I don't mean that negatively. The problem is it seems to me it's hard to imagine a time where there's been more focus given to this topic. And I don't know that we live in the best adjusted, mentally healthy time that's ever existed.
Right.
That's the contradiction. That's why if you're a person that's like, well, no, this is a really important topic, and you don't understand why people push back, whether or not, whatever pushback this kind of video will have, I don't know. Again, I haven't seen it either, is that there seems to be a contradiction in that the amount of money and time and focus and allowances made for mental health, and we don't live in this time of well-adjusted life.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure I will have a lot more to say about that, but maybe we should get to the video first.
All right.
Because it could be so bad that you and I are like, yeah, it's bad.
We're going to stop right there. And all right, let's watch this video. It's 2.5 minutes long. We may stop it just as a warning.
There's no such thing as PTSD. There's no such thing as OCD. There's no such thing as ADHD. Those are noble lies. To basically give the excuse to, in the end of the day, to medicate people. And Big Pharma is in charge of a lot of that.
Wow. Okay, I gotta stop it. This clip is gonna be gold. I can't believe it. All right, so Pastor Michael, here is. We are not gonna go watch the entire Q&A from Grace Church. I am going to trust the person who edited this clip, who we're watching, to not have been like John MacArthur saying something like, let me give all of this extra context and couch what I'm about to say explanation, I'm going to take it for granted that this person who is a master's seminary graduate and is now a pastor in California is not trying to do an insane hatchet job on John MacArthur. And if that's the case, whatever. Now, so Pastor Michael, he, in whatever question he was answering, probably what can a Christian do about, these things, he went out with, these don't exist, they're noble lies, and they exist so big pharma can medicate people. Now, I'm excited to go to the conspiracy corner with John MacArthur for the rest of this clip. Yes. Very excited. And we will discuss.
That's what I was saying. I feel like this took a turn that I wasn't expecting. I was expecting him to say something very different.
I think we're going to enjoy the next minute and a half of this, which is why I wanted to stop it here, because I think this is the point where if we would like to voice any negative feedback, here's the place. Now, let me just say this. I'll put it this way. When men came back from World War I or World War II, I don't know what the right name for what they experienced were, or men from Vietnam, or obviously even men, some men who served in some of the worst parts of the war in Iraq. I don't know what you want to call what those men experienced. But whether you want to call it shell shock or PTSD, those men had real psychological and physiological reactions to those things because of the experiences that they lived through. I think that's pretty much inarguable. And I don't think I'm telling a noble lie. I'm not making, you could say the reality of that, the response of medication or whatever is inappropriate. That's a completely different question. But the existence of the effects of war on someone's psyche and body, I just don't even think is an arguable thing.
Yep. Well, and even just, the things that he mentioned, OCD is maybe a little bit different. And I'm probably a little out of my depth speaking about some of this, but
this will be another good point.
Right. But when you think about OCD, ADHD in the most extreme of cases, this is something that might otherwise be, a small personality quirk or something like that is just, exacerbated to the extreme, right? Just an extreme thing. And that is something that happens in every area of fallen humanity, right? So think about any whether it be personality trait or any particular, physical trait that somebody has. And there's somewhere at some point in human history, somebody who that part of them was taken to an extreme that was unhealthy.
Yep.
But it, and so it seems weird to say, oh, this doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That seems like that is just a little too much. I'm speaking as somebody who always uses hyperbole.
Yep.
Which is one of my favorite lines ever. But this does seem way too hyperbolic.
Yep. And obviously, part of what JMac is responding to is the fact that every boy is diagnosed with ADHD.
Yep.
I just learned that someone I love was by their public school as a child. This was in the early 90s. Their teacher said this person needs ADHD medicine, and they were taken to a psychologist, and the psychologist was shocked that this recommendation was made, right? So there is an overdiagnosis that I have PTSD from my parents, spanking me, or, that these things, that there are people looking for diagnoses because we have a purely psychological understanding of problems in our secular world.
And because there is significant motivation being put, a significant profit motivation, because there's a significant push from large pharmaceutical companies
Yes.
that want to be able to sell more and more of the stuff that they make. That's it. I feel like at this point that should be an inarguable fact. That's why I'm almost tempted to say he's really close to right. He might be closer to right than close to wrong.
I would be willing to entertain that.
Yeah.
Because going with all the solutions we've attempted for these various things has not made any of this better. Like the existence of these problems, which I do believe are real and possible, have not decreased or improved in my lifetime.
Yes. And this is the fact. So I've lived in places, lived in areas, and been in cultures, just speaking in the US, not speaking, across the world, but even within the US, the different kinds of cultures that I've lived in. I've been in some that it is strange if you're not seeing a psychologist of some kind, right? It's seen as strange. A lot of people heavily medicated, and things don't get better. Right. Things don't. Right. And it's just expected that actually you're not going to necessarily improve. It's just part of life. And that is more common than not. And that is really unhealthy. When you see problems like this, though, to just to do something like apply a solution like medicating it, this is a lot like when you deal with something like obesity, and the solution to obesity becomes, well, what if we have a pill that can make you not want to eat?
Right.
Well, you're not actually solving the deeper underlying root problem.
Yes.
That's going to be the case with a whole lot of psychological and mental issues as well, that there are root problems. Usually it has to do with sin or living in a fallen world. Yes. Right. You think about, or even it happens to be, being enculturated by a culture that is against nature and against God, right? And the God of nature. So, for instance, you take the situation with the radical over medication of perfectly healthy boys because they're said to have some kind of, hyperactivity. But why? How are you getting that diagnosis? You're getting that diagnosis usually from women in a school setting where little boys are forced to sit in a desk for hours and hours a day. They're supposed to just be compliant and listen and sit nice. And then teachers say, look at all these girls are doing just fine. They're sitting fine. They're not having any trouble with this. Here's all these boys. They're having all this trouble. They must have this problem. No, it's not a problem. It's that you're doing something that's against nature, right? Little boys are made to haul wood, right? Little boys are made to do things, right? They're made to be extremely physical in what they're doing. They have constant energy. And when you constrain them to a desk for many, many hours a day, of course they're going to not be able to pay attention. Of course, that makes tons of sense. Yes. And there's going to be more extreme cases of that. Right. But what's actually happening in that situation, and a lot of these situations could be seen in the same light, is that what you have is you're doing something that's against nature. It's against how God has designed the world. And there is a bubbling up of an issue that is an issue only because you're doing something wrong in the first place.
If you've designed your whole life, society and culture against nature, do you think you're going to be anxious a lot of the time?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is yes.
Yep.
I think that there are two really important things. The people who don't like what J-Max said at all, I think part of what you need to do is go back to listen to like all 200 episodes of the White Horse Inn where they talk about moralistic therapeutic deism as the religion of the church in our culture. That's what we're talking about. Yep. We're talking about a purely therapeutic understanding of the world as a problem. But I actually love the example you gave with obesity, because I think it shows us the two sides of the coin that I want to hold together, especially in issues like this. One, I agree with you. There is a sin issue likely in at least possible in regards to these things. We could have lack of discipline. We could have the sin of gluttony, right? We could identify a number of reasons of again, you have a life that is lived against nature, and it comes out in how you relate to food, and Jesus Christ can free and change your relationship to those things, whatever, right? And those actually are areas for the pastor, who has always been thought of as a doctor of the soul. The problem is, we know we live in a time where institutions aren't trusted and the world is so out of balance. Now it's like, pastors, it's your job to address obesity. And so pastors you'll see people tweet things like, don't get a pastor if he can't bench 225 for reps, right? Like, we turn benching or losing weight into spiritual things, which is foolish. Like, and even if there is a soul issue with some of these things, your pastor has no place and certainly no expertise in to tell you what is necessarily a healthy lifestyle. I mean, hopefully he has some idea, but it is not his place in the world to make diet plans, unless you're Rick Warren, the greatest greatest pastor among men. Then you can publish the Daniel plan. But right, so I think about this with things like mental health. I do agree there is probably a sin issue. There are probably spiritual issues we should address, but you also aren't just a soul.
Yep.
Right? Your soul has to use a body and, I believe, a brain, and those things require expertise I don't have. Right? There are clearly physical, and I believe the brain is part of that physical body. Yep. And those are areas of expertise I don't have. Mm-hmm. I can't answer those questions. And it is foolish for me to deny the existence of those problems. Right? It is foolish for me to make all of those things into spiritual problems, because that's a broken leg isn't, a spiritual problem. Maybe you broke the leg being drunk. Now I have a spiritual problem. There's also still a physical problem. Do not come to me to set your leg. Do not come to me, right? When we have to figure out legitimately, how do you ride in a car when you have PTSD from being in a vehicle that blew up in Iraq? I don't know. I am not qualified to answer that question.
Yeah. So what you're pointing out is that if you were getting your advice on how to deal with these things from John MacArthur, then, I mean, you probably shouldn't anyway, right? So right. You don't need to be mad at him for saying these things as much as you need to find somebody that actually does.
He's pushing back on a real problem. He's probably in a somewhat fundamentalist fashion ultimately this, which is probably maybe not the best thing to do. But no, you shouldn't be getting what I will call clinical, right, psychiatric advice from a pastor. That's a bad idea.
Yep. Now let's also say, I mean, because we're just putting layers of nuance on it, and maybe again we'll keep listening to this video and we'll be like,
can't wait for the next part.
Because we live in an overly therapeutic culture, it's also very possible that you are in a place of sin, and a pastor may call that out, and you may try to cover up your sin by saying, oh, sorry, that's actually a therapist issue. That's actually a psychologist issue. You don't actually have expertise on that. And so just be aware, that's also something that very regularly happens.
When you live in a secular world where we basically deny, right? If the error John MacArthur made is all you are is a soul, there's really no possibility of other factors. The error we're going to see widely made is you don't have a soul.
Right.
This is a naturalistic, explainable, whether it be chemistry or, talk therapy, whatever you want, right? All right. Let's go with him where this is going. Maybe this is what Costi wasn't ready for. This calling out of Pfizer.
if you understand, take PTSD, for example. What that really is grief. You are fighting a war, you lost your buddies.
Okay.
You have a certain amount of survival guilt because you made it back, they didn't. How do you deal with grief? Grief is a real thing. But grief is part of life. And if you can't navigate grief, you can't live life. But if you clinically define that, you can give them a pill, a series of medications, and they end up in LA homeless on the sidewalk. This is in regard to children, it's the most deadly thing that's been unleashed on children, medication. We're trying to make clear to parents that behavior.
Costihan is either not having this or has resting oh no face. Like,
I can't tell because later on in the video he does kind of shake his head, but also I do that whenever I talk to anybody about anything, right? Like I'm just, hey, I'm hearing you.
All right,
and so maybe he's just doing that.
Let's finish it.
Is essentially the result of choices that kids make. And if you parent them properly, they'll make right choices. But if you blame it on something other than their choices, and you identify them as having something they can't do anything about, but medicate it, you literally are turning your child into a potential, well, not only a potential drug addict, but maybe a potential criminal, because they never learn how to navigate life in a socially acceptable way.
All right, Pastor Michael. So John MacArthur went ahead and clarified that the exact example that I thought was an inarguable phenomenon was precisely what he was going to take aim at. Now let me just say again, I agree. It matters who we let define our problems.
Yes,
because they get to define the solutions.
Yep.
I still think shell shock, as I'm now going to call it, I will not use Big Pharma's name for John MacArthur.
Yes,
is more than grief or survivor's guilt, which are both very real human experiences.
Yep. And now that can be a part of it, right? Like that can add into it. There's many layers to it. But there is actual, physiological trauma response, right? Like that's part of, that is part of how God has designed people in a way to protect them, right? I've heard when I've done training in the areas of preventing abuse of children and things like that. One of the things a lot of the folks that are heavily engaged in that work and trying to train people in spotting or preventing the abuse of children is they'll just point out that, the trauma response in children, although you never want it to happen, right? Like you never want that to happen, yet in some ways it's something that actually it allows them to continue on, right? When they've experienced things that are almost beyond belief, right? It allows you, the psychological split that somebody could have, or things like that, when they're abused. Right. You think a lot of these things, when it comes to experiences with PTSD, can have similar elements. Not all of it, obviously, but there are ways that God has designed the body where in a fallen world, when it experiences certain things, it's going to have a physiological response that makes then normal life very challenging and hard. It can be hard to get over. It can be hard to relearn what it's like to live a normal life. And there's a million different ways that this comes out, not just with PTSD, but a lot of these things. But it is weird it would be weird to deny any of the physiological side to it.
Right.
That is an extreme position.
Yeah.
At the same time, with what he goes on to say, I don't know. I think he's more right than wrong.
Yeah, it's at least a worthy thought experiment, let's say, especially with children. Let's grant all of these problems are real. Would the problems be better or worse if we medicated no children? Young men are now the most likely to commit suicide. They are underachieving in virtually every area in our country.
Yep.
Now I don't have an answer to that thought experiment, by the way, but it's at least a 100% worthy question.
Right. Well, and pointing out that very often, these types of designations of mental health problems can and are, like, I think inarguably are at times used as a way to excuse sin, excuse bad choices, excuse bad parenting, excuse you, rather than having to actually face up to, okay, I actually did something wrong, or I'm not handling this like I should, or I need to make different choices. I put myself in a bad situation. Whatever, right? No, my child actually can learn more than I think they can. There's a lot of ways that of course that happens. Sometimes whenever we talk about these sorts of things, especially when they come really close to home, right? Like they hit something that is really difficult to deal with, usually having to do with your own shame, your own sense of guilt, a lot of times with your own sin. When something like this gets really close to it, and especially when something is said in a goofy way where you can go after it, right? Like you can go after it. It's really easy to just shrug it off, react really strongly against it, try to make it seem like, well, that guy, he's just dumb. What does he know? But actually, maybe you should just think about it. Maybe there's some truth to it. Maybe there is something to what he's saying while still being goofy, right? And I in part probably want to defend it because I know that I'm going to say goofy things at times that, you can listen to this podcast and think, okay, he didn't say that exactly right. But if John MacArthur's concern is that we over-medicalize everything, we over-medicate these problems, we use it as an excuse for sin, and that there's actually biblical teaching that would help in a lot of these cases, well, that is true. And so you don't want to just throw it all out because he said something in a way, or even he said something in a way that makes it sound wrong, or even if he said something wrong, doesn't mean that everything he's saying should be thrown out the window.
Yeah. Well, he also made LA sound like a beautiful place, didn't he? This has been J-Mac Watch.
I've been to LA. I know it's not. I know it's not a beautiful place.
Kossi Hin, we'd love you. I'd love to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us for J-Mac Watch. Join us tomorrow for a celebration of the ascension of our Lord Jesus Christ.